Hello everyone, it's Silvia. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to talk about what I think are my most scarily accurate decks. So I believe a couple of years ago I created a tag with my most accurate decks, or I think it was a VR inspired video. Someone had posted some of their most accurate decks, and I mirrored that. I always thought that it was worthwhile to talk about how accurate a deck is, because after all, this is our profession. We are professional tarot readers, and obviously these are the tools of our profession. And I remember whenever you talk to someone, especially when they have their own business, they will tell you that their own tools of their own business are incredibly important, because obviously, invest in them, you probably spend a little bit more on them, and you have to insure them, you have to treat them well, you have to clean them, you have to maintain them, you have to make sure that they last as long as possible, because sometimes, and if you do have your own business, you will know this, even when you do replace something with a tool with another tool that is supposed to do exactly the same thing, it actually really doesn't. And it's probably due to the fact that with the older tool, you're probably used to it, you know how to use it at its best. There's a number of reasons why it's very difficult to find a replacement to something, especially after we have used it for a long time. And I would say it's the same thing with decks. I mean, I buy new decks almost every week. And I am always on the lookout for new decks, especially when they offer me the possibility to have new insights or a new way to look at the cards. By the way, sorry about my cat in the background. He's being fed, he's being cuddled, he's fine. He's just a little bit jealous that I'm spending time with you guys. It's okay. So when we talk about tarot, we need to have a deck that we trust 100%, because after all, there's only so much you can do as a tarot reader. Our job is literally to look at the cards, interpret the cards, understand the message, and then relate back to the person we're reading for. But if the tarot deck doesn't work with us, then I can assure you 100% you could be the best tarot reader in the world, but if the deck is not cooperating, it's very difficult to get an accurate reading or a good reading. So on the other end of the spectrum, you could have the best tarot deck in the world, but if you don't know how to read the cards, you will never get to a reading. But that's a different story, isn't it? So what I'm going to show you today are the decks that they're not just the most accurate ones, but these decks, they are so accurate, they're actually scary. And by scary, I mean that their message, what they tell you, is so accurate that there's no way around it. And I know that this at first may not make much sense, because if you end up having a scarily accurate deck, you think you want to use it every day, right? To just find out about the future, find out about so many things. And so I thought 20 years ago, even more than 20 years ago actually, about 22, 23 years ago, that was my attitude towards, in particular, one deck that I found. And then this deck kept on saying things as they were, and even when I didn't want them to be as they were. And so, I started using it less and less. And I remember talking to other people that have this deck, and they have the same experience. So this is kind of official. So let me just show you. It's this deck here. Let me just zoom in because it's tiny. And this is not even a tarot deck. It's not an oracle deck, but it is by all means a divination deck. It is 100% correct every single time. And as I said, it's not just me saying that. Every single person that has this deck, that have a way with tarot that read tarot, if not in a professional, at a professional level, at least with a certain knowledge of tarot. Which is ironic because you don't necessarily need to know about tarot in order to read this deck, with this deck. But you do need to know how to approach archetypes, because there's a lot of archetypes in this deck. Let's just say that I know that there's probably a lot of people out there that have this deck and they don't necessarily know how to approach it. And so they don't see it as scary, which I wish I were. Trust me, I wish it was the case for me. Unfortunately, this deck and I have spent at least 22 years that I remember together, and I cannot recall a time in which this deck was wrong. I remember a number of times in which I was thinking to myself, this can't be, come on, it's a wrong reading, oh, it didn't really work, or I'm just gonna try and pull something else. No, it just, every single time it proved me wrong and the deck right. It's called the Answer deck, and as I said, it's not even a tarot deck, it's not an oracle deck, it's not necessarily an archetype deck. So let me just talk about this deck and show you this deck for what you get when you buy it. I don't know if you can still find this deck. I think it might be out of print. It was one of the really cheap ones that they used to put. For example, I bought this the first time. I bought this at Waterstone in London 22 years ago, probably even 23, and it was at the checkout. You know those things that they put at the checkout because it's an impulse buy. If you have bought something already at the checkout, you have to wait in line, you look around you, you find this one and say, oh, you know, it's only for £14 or something like that. I can't recall how much I spent for this, but it wasn't necessarily expensive, and you're like, yeah, I'm just gonna buy it. So this is printed by Running Press, and yeah, it's just called the Answer deck. Past, present, future, it's all in these cards. I don't think I've ever read anything more accurate than this. So in any case, this is what you get. You get a, let's say, how to use the deck, very tiny instruction. Then you get a small booklet where they more or less tell you how to read. Let's say they give you this as a spread. That's the one that I always use. And then they just give you the cards. They don't even tell you any kind of explanation for the cards. There's a couple of explanations for a few of the archetypes presented in this deck. For example, the Fool, the Woman of the World, the Master, the Lady, and the Troubleshooter, but that's it. And then it does also tell you something about if a card appears upside down. I do not shuffle reversals with this deck. I think that it's accurate already. I don't really need to shuffle the reversals. And then it tells you more or less how to ask a question for guidance in career and romance, which to me is like, that's not even this in the ballpark. It's not the same thing at all, but it does tell you more or less what questions to ask. And then business questions, and then I believe there's general questions, and that's it. Okay, so then you have this, which is it's almost as if it were a reading mat. As you can see here, it's almost as if it were a reading mat. It's just that it's not in fabric, it's in paper, which makes it not very practical to use, but I know this by heart, so I know the positions by heart, so I don't use this anymore. And let me tell you, as I said, and this is the deck. As you notice, it's been used many times. I used to use it all the time many years ago, as soon as I got it, because I didn't know what I had in my hands. And then I remember talking about this deck with all of my friends back then, and these were friends I was doing readings for. And I remember talking to them, and one of them, one of my closest friends that unfortunately passed away, she used to call it the Jumanji Deck. And that was a reference to a movie called Jumanji with Robin Williams back then. Of course, afterwards they made a couple of either sequel or remakes. I can't remember. And you know, if you're not familiar with Jumanji, it was this board game that was cursed, and when you opened it, it unleashed the curse upon you and you had to finish the game. And whatever was happening in the game was happening in real life. So if in the game, for example, you pulled a card that said that you were going to be swarmed by giant mosquitoes, in real life, the protagonists of the movie were swamped by giant mosquitoes and they had to fight them off. And obviously, you know, they had this task to fulfill. And I'm not going to share anything anymore because if you haven't watched it, it's not the same, let's put it this way, as the new movies, the original one. So I highly recommend it. So this friend of mine used to call this deck the Jumanji Deck, and then I started calling the Jumanji Deck with everyone I know, and every time we talk about it, it's the Jumanji Deck. And there is one detail that makes it even more so a deck that I look at with a mixture of fear, expectation, and also respect and affection, because this friend of mine that is no longer with us, when she prepared the a letter that was read at her funeral, she actually referenced to this deck. And that I knew then when I listened to it, I knew that she was kind of winking at me, because obviously, you know, she was referencing this deck, and she knew that I was the only one that could understand that reference. So I still call it the Jumanji Deck. It will never be called in a different way for me. And whenever I look at it that way, obviously I feel less fear. But I can assure you 100%, if you use this deck, just don't think that whatever it tells you is not accurate. Don't think that you can escape it somehow, because you won't be able to. This is actually scary. It is. If the heartbreak card comes up, you will experience heartbreak. It might not be final, there might be some further developments, but you will sooner or later go through everything that this deck is telling you, you will go through. And that's one of the reasons why I don't use it as much, because I don't know, I feel that when I was in my 20s, in my 30s, I would have killed to have a deck like this, and now I'm like, certain things I just want not to know about them. I don't know if it makes sense, but it is the most scarily accurate deck I have ever had. And yeah, if you have it and you haven't used it much because it doesn't resonate with you, or you don't know, but it's not an easy deck to use. I completely understand that. It's not easy because, as I said, it's for divination only, not for introspection, and it needs a certain question being asked in a certain way, and there's archetypes as well that need to be interpreted in a certain way as well. So obviously you gain more knowledge the more you use this deck, but the caveat is just be aware that what it tells you is going to happen. So what I do recommend, take photos of the spreads once you do them, and then when something happens, go back to them and you will understand the cards a little bit more, or how to read them. Okay, so that was the first one that I wanted to show you. And as you can see today, it's all going to be about, yes, incredibly accurate decks, but also decks that are so accurate that are actually scary. And I remember, as I said, I remember doing a video a couple of years ago on my most accurate decks, but at the back of my mind, there's always been the element of fear associated with how accurate these decks are. And a couple of weeks ago, I watched a video by Candy Soul and Soil, and she was talking about a scarily accurate method of reading the cards. So not necessarily about decks, but a scarily accurate method of reading. And I thought to myself, you know, it's out there in the open. Yes, we can say that something is scarily accurate. We can say that. So let's have a look at the other decks. So another deck that is scarily accurate, and it's still a small one, so I will have to zoom back in, is the Barbara Walker Tarot. This is a mass market deck that I believe is still in print. So you can still get it, and it's been published by US Games. It's a tin. It's a tarot in a tin. I do know that there was originally a full size, let's say. deck, but I don't have it, and to be honest, this is such a scary deck that it's scary enough when it's small. Why would I want it to be bigger? You know what I mean? So I'm pretty happy to have the smaller one. I'm happy with that. It's fine. So this is incredibly accurate. I do not, to the point that I do not use it for clients. If someone, look at this Kali, the Queen of Swords. If someone asks for it, if some of my members want a reading with this deck, I generally circle back to them and ask them why. Because I kind of would never want a reading out of this deck for myself. That's how scared I am of this deck. And so if someone specifically asks for it, I generally want to know why, if they have it. And then obviously if they insist, I will use it, you know, at your funeral. But honestly, I want to understand what the pull is of this deck on people, because for me, this is one of the decks that, I mean, when it tells you, let me put it this way, it's clearly a tarot deck. When you pull a card that, generally speaking, in an RWS clone, you would think it's like a warning card, you know what I mean? Like a card that tells you be careful because there's something that may happen. In the Barbara Walker Tarot, it's the worst of the worst of the worst. So there's different ways to depict something, right? There's different ways to depict the Five of Pentacles. This one, I don't know if you can see it. Let me just put the card closer to the lens, because I really need you to see everything that is happening in this card. I mean, look at the despair that is painted on this character, and this character, and this character, and this character. And please, let's not talk about this character here. Oof, I can't focus on it. That is, it's practically, I don't even know, is this person alive? Because, you know, it looks that to me. And, you know, you know what I mean? So there's different ways to depict a card, a Five of Pentacles, but this is the worst possible way to depict it. And that's the reason why when we think about, many of us, me included, when we think about the Barbara Walker Tarot, we feel like when it tells you something in the worst possible way that it can be told. And but it's very accurate at the same time. So it's not one of those decks that is just negative for negative's sake. And please understand, when I talk about dark or scary, I'm not necessarily talking about a deck that is dark, even though one of the ones that I'm going to show you today is also rather dark, as in the images and the vibes, but it's the meaning, the vibe, the energy, what it tells you, the message. It's just really, really, really accurate. But at the same time, it's accurate in the most blunt, direct, no frills, scary way. Scary, you see, scary is a good word. So that's the second deck that I wanted to show you today. And so we talked about another deck that I wanted to show you that is not necessary, that is also dark, but it's also scary because it's accurate. And it's this one here. It's the Deviian Moon Tarot by Patrick Valenza. This is the borderless edition. I have another version of this deck, which is the paradoxical, which I absolutely love. And ironically, the paradoxical version is less creepy. Pardon me for using the word creepy. It's just that it is, at the end of the day, it is a bit creepy. Let's put it this way, it is a bit creepy. However, the paradoxical, because your brain kind of goes into some kind of a pause. So if you're not familiar with the paradoxical version, it looks very similar to the concept of the negative of a photograph. So the colors are basically switched. You can Google it and you'll see the images. It's a very beautiful deck. I like it, and it's got a completely different vibe from this deck. As a matter of fact, I actually believe that it's a lot more, how should I say, balanced than this one. This deck is very dark. But in any case, that's not the reason why I wanted to show you this deck today in my, let's say, countdown to the most scarily accurate decks. This is a darker deck. Yes, of course it is. I mean, look at the images. But at the same time, it is scarily accurate. It is incredibly scarily accurate. Whenever you do a reading, whenever I do a reading with this deck, and I take my time and I look at the images and I understand where all of the symbols are coming from and what they want to mean, what they signify, and everything, it is incredibly powerful. It brings with it a finality that other decks don't have. Now, let's talk about this, because I personally believe that tarot always gives you a way out. Tarot always gives you the possibility to read with a bit of a buffer zone. You can always be flexible when you read the message out of a deck. Let's not confuse that with not knowing how to read tarot and just using intuition. That is, you guys know how upset I become whenever someone just tells me, oh, I read it intuitively. Do you know how to read it not intuitively? No, I don't need to. That's what gets me really upset. Please, intuition is wonderful, but please start with knowing how to read tarot and then you can use your intuition. Because unfortunately, as tarot readers, we have a responsibility, believe it or not, we have a responsibility to understand the message out of the card in a proper way and to relate in a proper way to the person we're reading for. So if you are just using your intuition and you don't even know how to read tarot, you are not a good tarot reader. Because it's almost as if you wouldn't care less about the person you're reading for. And yes, of course, if you're reading just for yourself, you're only harming yourself. But trust me, please, start with the meanings of the card. The cards came with meanings. And then if you want to apply your intuition and read it in a completely different way, fair enough. But at least you start the way you should. Anyway, so this one is incredibly, scarily accurate, and so I was reading, the Patrick Vines has also released a coffee table art style book about this deck and the process that went behind the creation of it, and it also talks about a little bit more about the cards. I highly recommend it if you can afford it. It's about $70, $65, $70 depending, sometimes it's on sale. But it does give you an even deeper perspective or, a deeper insight on these cards that I highly recommend. But really, this deck's scarily accurate. And on the same kind of wavelength, I would put this deck. This is the Cross Magic Tarot by Londa Max. This is also a US Games. Unfortunately, I believe that this deck is out of print. And it's not necessarily an easy deck to find. I was lucky enough to find it sold in a Facebook group by a person that used to have a shop, and she sold it to me for a very reasonable price, so I'm very grateful. This is one of those decks that I would say I've seen it the first time in Anna's channel, Anna the Astral Lady Tarot. She absolutely loved this deck. She loves it so much. She uses it all the time. I believe that she's got a couple of versions of this deck, if I'm not wrong. I really like her. I believe that she's a great tarot reader. She really knows her stuff when it comes to tarot. So when I watched many of her videos in which she was talking about this deck and she was saying how much she loves it because it's a very accurate reader, I thought to myself, when I saw it for sale, I thought to myself, look, let's try it out. Let's give it a try because I really trust her. I like her. And I think that if she's saying that this is an excellent reader, I'll believe her. And so I got this deck and oh my god, I did not think that I would have found the perfect career deck. This is the perfect deck for a career center or career themed reading. Career and work, let's put them both together. I think it's a combination of the vibes, the really strong power of the suit of pentacles or coins as they have been renamed here, that you can really feel. This is not a deck that is good for me. I don't know if other readers will use it for relationship reading. I really would not use it for anything other than career or business related, finances related reading. But this is incredibly accurate to the point of being scary. And whenever you're doing a reading for a career and the outcome coming from these cards is not necessarily positive one, it is very scary. It is very scary. I don't know whether it's just because of the reasons that I told you, or for other reasons. It's just something that I feel whenever I use these cards, because they are incredibly powerful. And it's also related to a number of things, namely the symbols that you can see here, the keywords at the bottom of the cards. Sometimes I read, sometimes I don't. Not just the images, because obviously, this is obviously a deck that is slightly darker than other decks, but it's not super dark. I would say that the Deviant Moon is a lot darker than this one. And as you can see, that doesn't mean anything. Just because a deck is dark doesn't make it necessarily scarily accurate. This is about the symbols. This is for, as I said, a number of details present on the card, the keywords at the bottom, the way in which it reads, the vibes, anything, you name it. I don't really know, but this is one of my most scarily accurate decks. Another scarily accurate deck is this one. It's an indie deck, apologies for that. However, this indie deck is not incredibly expensive. Compared to a lot of mass market decks, to be honest, this is probably on par with some of the more expensive mass market decks. So if you want to buy this deck, I believe it's still in print. It's the Cosmic Cycles Tarot by Martina Raza and Miriam E.G. This is the second edition that I've got. I know that there's a couple of different editions out there. One of them is really pretty because it's got, I believe, pinkish or purple edges, which I really thought about, but I couldn't justify the additional expense just to have the edges. This is one of my workhorse decks because even though it is scarily accurate, this is not a dark deck. So when you just have a scarily accurate deck that is not also dark, as in graphically dark, I actually really like to use it. It is a deck that has characters on the younger side, but it doesn't really bother me. As a matter of fact, I completely understand it because it is the story of the Page of Wands. Sorry, that is the thank you card that should not be used when I shuffle the deck. And after all of the thematics that you can see, the dynamics that you can see in the cards reflected here are actually very modern rather than just young. So if by young we mean modern, yes, but at the same time, we have been in many similar situations, driving around with our doggos, for example, because we need a break and we need to run away from a situation. So we feel that we're driving into the sunset and that's our victory. You don't really need to be 20 years old in order to experience this. You can be 60 and having exactly the same experience. And so for me, this is one of those decks that I really love. I think that it's been made in an excellent way. It does, as I say, follow the story of the Page of Wands, the protagonist. And it's a really interesting story. Obviously, there's a lot that goes on. There's a lot of grief as well that needs to be processed. There's a lot of incredibly beautiful things that happen. There's also a lot of sad things that happen. But they are very relatable. It resonates with a lot of people. I generally see that there's a lot of people really grateful for me to use this deck because when I do the reading, the stuff I refer to is universally accepted and universally recognized. So look at this work card, isn't it just beautiful? So I would say that this deck is one of my most scarily accurate because honestly, when you refer to the experiences, and this is one of the reasons why I would say or judge or deem that one deck is scarily accurate is when the experiences that are portrayed in the cards resonate with the majority of people. It's just that every single one of us can see something they recognize, they relate to in the cards. And so when you pull a card, three cards, a Celtic cross, it doesn't matter. When you do a pull and you see the cards and you see something that resonates with you, that maybe has happened to you, that has been possibly part of your life, that makes it more accurate because it obviously speaks to you directly. It doesn't feel like it's talking about general archetypes. It doesn't say the emperor needs to put order after chaos. It says you need to put some order in your life. So it really feels like it's breaking the fourth wall. So I say this when I'm looking at the Queen of Swords, which is incredibly powerful in this deck, because I don't know if you can tell, but she's literally breaking the fourth wall. So she's looking directly at me, the reader. And there is this sense of inviting me in, but there's also a sense of holding me accountable and holding me responsible and telling me you've done this, this and that, and now you have to respond to what you've done. So there's a number of ways that I recognize a deck as scarily accurate. This one ticks almost all the boxes. Not the box that says that it's a scary deck, because it isn't at the end of the day, but when it comes to the experiences, it is scary. It is scary how much it will resonate with so many people. And there's another deck that I want to show you today that falls more or less into the same category as this one when it comes to the experiences. And I will always say this, and I'm sorry that it's an indie deck and it's out of print. It's very hard to find, and as a matter of fact, if you do find it for sale on eBay, Facebook, you name it, it's gonna be for a really high price, because unfortunately it is sought after. It is the Sebisol Tarot by Judy Whitelish. I always talk about this as my favorite deck of all time. I think it's still up there. It might not be the number one, but it's definitely within the first three. And I would have to say that now I'm actually using it less as I used to, because I don't want to ruin it, because I have seen how difficult it is to buy another copy, and I just don't have, I don't think I'll be able to afford another copy. So I really try not to ruin this one that I have. But the readings that I do with this deck are scarily accurate, really scarily accurate, as in you think twice about using this deck, honestly. And one of the reasons is that the experiences, you know, the images that you can see in the cards refer to experiences that are so relatable, that are incredibly relatable. And as a consequence of that, it really feels like it's talking to me or to the person I'm reading for. It is very unapologetic. It's one of those decks that I would call unapologetic, in the sense that it doesn't shy away from showing you the truth and also, you know, making a couple of comments about the truth. It is at the same time not a scary deck when it comes to the vibes, because it's not, but it is one of those decks that doesn't let you turn away from the truth, from the message. And it takes courage. I believe that it takes courage, especially when you see cards like this, the Ten of Swords. It's a dead end. And it talks about betrayal. So I have different ways to read the Ten of Swords, especially because I read numerologically. Sometimes, though, the situation calls for me to read it as the normal way I would read an RWS clone. But I always find that decks give me a little bit of leeway, as in they tell me, look, this is the message, but there's always something that you can say in order to help the other person, okay, when you're doing a reading. Not hide the truth and not change it and not make it look less scary than what it is, but you can help the other person accept it. So tarot gives me that possibility. This deck doesn't. Not in the sense that it's denying me something, it's not that. It's just that the message is so clear because of the images are so relatable that it doesn't, the other person will be able to read the cards just by looking at the images as well. You know what I mean? And it does so in a very eloquent way, and it does so in a very, I would say, Julie really feels to me like she is a master of tarot, the creator Julie, because knowing when you're producing a deck that is so scarily accurate, you have to be careful not to show some cards that may take away the hope in the person you're reading for, whether you're reading for yourself or you're reading for somebody else. Let me just give you an example. When you're making a deck like this, you have to be really careful not to show the death card as a death, an actual death, because that is not the meaning of the death card. But because this deck is so relatable, if you know the other person doesn't need me necessarily to translate the cards because the message is so clear, and if you make the mistake as a tarot creator of showing the death card as an actual death, the other person will see that and they will interpret the card as a death, which is wrong. So I hope I'm explaining myself. It's not an easy concept, probably not easy because I struggle myself to understand it, to fully understand it or fully grasp it. But this to me is one of those decks where the creator, when they're showing a card that could be misconstrued as something else, they have to be very careful in how they depict it. If you make a Marseille deck and you're showing a 10 of swords, it's a pip deck, so you're not really scared about making mistakes with a pip deck. An illustrated deck, even more so an illustrated and very accurate and relatable deck, you have to be careful. I don't know what you think about that. Please let me know in the comments below. These are the decks I wanted to show you today. These are my most scarily accurate decks. But I'm all open for suggestion. If there is a deck out there that I haven't talked about today and you know of this deck to be scarily accurate, please let me know in the comments below because I'm all for it. So I would definitely check it out. But thank you so much for being there and have a nice day. Bye!